Ladies, gentlemen, and haradrim of all ages, with Diablo 4's proper public beta fully in gear, everyone is jumping at the bit to get their hands on this lovely free look at the upcoming game. In this beta, there are 5 classes, all with their own strengths and weaknesses, and so as the weekend progresses and you get to higher and higher levels, you may be wondering what build to go for on your class of choice, whether it is your first class nearing 25 or if it is your second character, starting off in alt just to see how a different class feels. Here on the channel, we've leveled each class to level 25, done tons of messing around with various abilities and full-on builds to try and find the best builds that we can possibly achieve at the level 25 cutoff of the demo. We've got some seriously powerful things going on here, so today we're going to cover over the best builds that we've found for each and every one of the 5 classes in the Diablo 4 beta, so you can mess around with them at a proper power level and feel what its heights are currently like. Of course, we also have our full class guides available for every one of these individually, so if you want a bit more detail on the builds as well as more pointers for the classes as a whole, go check those out. These will just be a relatively quick rundown of the best builds for each one. Without further ado then, let's start off with the Barbarian. The best Barbarian build in the beta is sort of a silly interaction with some certain gear and certain passives in the skill tree, based almost entirely around thorns. Every class can get thorns. Thorns is a stat let you return damage to any enemy that touches you, but Barbarian is uniquely capable of properly boosting these thorns into insanity thanks to some skills available to them. So first up, let's talk skills. First up, your basic skill is Flay. This does some direct damage, but also applies a bit of bleed damage that takes over 6 seconds. Our enhancements give this a 10% chance to apply vulnerability to an enemy that is hit, boosted to 20% when applied with a two-handed weapon, which generally we will be doing, as we will be pretty much just applying all of our damage skills to a two-handed sword. Then the second enhancement gives Flay a stacking buff up to 4 every time that you hit an enemy that gives you damage reduction and a ton of thorns. After that, we move to our core skills, and the focus here will be Rend. This is the big boy version of Flay, applying an absolute ton of bleed damage, but this attack also hits at a frontal cone cleave. The enhancements on this increase the duration of vulnerable on enemies if they are afflicted by it, synergizing with Flay. Then the second one gives you a refund on fury spent on Rend depending on how many enemies you hit with it. Then we have 3 defensive abilities, which may seem a bit crazy, but it works perfectly into the build. We have Rallying Cry to boost movement speed and resource generation, with enhancements to give you Unstoppable when active and also increase resource generation even further. Then we have Iron Skin for a big defensive barrier, and enhancements to this to give it a heal over time effect as well. Then we have Challenging Shout. This taunts enemies nearby and gives you a big hefty damage reduction buff. The enhancements for this give you bonus maximum life and also thorns equal to half of your maximum life. Then we go for the thorns passives here. Outburst simply gives you some thorns as a base and also thorns for any bonus maximum life that you have. Then we fill out Tough as Nails for a full-on 60% bonus to all of your thorns. Your total thorns simply boosted by 60%, and that is nuts. As well, enemies take 1% of your thorns damage as bleeding when they hit you. Then finally we have our ultimate ability, which is Call of the Ancients. This simply works wonders both single target and in wave clearing, and the enhancement that we have on this increases our attack speed and damage while it is active. Past this, you just want as much thorns on your armor and amulet as possible. You want to eat a thorns elixir for a little bit more. You want to put emeralds in any sockets that you have on your armor specifically so that it gives you more thorns. Then you don't actually require a single legendary for this to be super strong. But if you want it to get absolutely nuts, there is only one legendary that you need, which is this one to make it so anytime that thorns is triggered on one enemy, it has a pretty high chance of also pulsing your thorns damage out in an AoE around you. This build can reach well over 1,000 thorns, which just decimates enemies when they hit you. It's silly in all of the best ways, and I've not seen a single build stronger than this for Barbarian, at least as of level 25.
Stop hitting yourself! Ow!
Secondly then, let's talk about the Sorcerer. This is a build based pretty much around being nearly immortal while also having significant cooldown reduction to let you use absolutely massive spells near constantly, just absolutely wrecking anything on the screen. First off, for skills you want Spark, mostly just so you can get to the enhancement Glinting Spark, which gives it a 2% increased critical strike chance per cast. Then in your core skills you want Chain Lightning. This is a massively strong AoE spell that does exactly what it sounds like. You fire a lightning bolt off and it bounces between enemies a few times. Then the enhancement give it slowly growing critical hit chance with every bounce, adding to your crit potential, and also one so that if Chain Lightning bounces off of you instead of an enemy, its next hit does bonus damage. Then we have Ice Armor in your defensives, and this is your big defensive skill that makes you pretty much nearly unkillable. With 6 seconds of barrier every 20 seconds by default, the barrier amount is also increased by 10% of your damage dealt, which is sort of silly. As well, with the modifier, we have increased mana regen while Ice Armor is up. Then you want to fill up the Glass Cannon passive. It's just too good not to do, even with with the increased damage intake. Then the big one here is another passive, Elemental Attunement. This gives you a 15% chance to reset the cooldown of ice armor every time you get a critical hit, and this can only happen once every 10 seconds. The thing is, between Spark and Chain Lightning, you'll pretty much have this proc as much as it physically can, which lets you have ice armor for pretty much 6 out of every 10 seconds, which is just silly. Then we go for Ice Blades in the next cluster. This does decent damage and has a 30% vulnerability status proc chance, but more importantly than that, here are the modifiers. The first one makes it so Ice Blade's cooldown is reduced by 1 second every time it hits a vulnerable enemy, and then the second makes it so 50% of the cooldown reduction from this is applied to every skill on your bar, which is just nuts. Then you take Max Ranks of Hydra as your main single target damage skill. This summons a sort of multi-headed turret on the ground that does a load of damage over a load of singular shots. For the modifiers, you have an additional head of your Hydra, which is essentially a 25% damage boost to the skill if you cast it while you're at 80% health or above. You also get 30% crit chance on your Hydras for 3 seconds anytime that you crit personally, which again, you will be doing loads of. Then finally for your ultimate, you get Deep Freeze. This makes you fully immune for 4 seconds, dealing decent damage over time while active, then having a nice big pop of damage at the end. The big thing about this though is that obviously because of all of our cooldown reduction skills, you can cast this way more often than once per minute, which makes it just sort of silly in practice. Then for your enchantment, you make it so every time you spend 20 seconds worth of cooldown abilities, you spawn an Ice Blades for free. This has the vulnerable procs, this has the cooldown reductions, so you create a beautiful sort of synergy where casting Deep Freeze creates 3 Ice Blades that lower the cooldown of Deep Freeze a massive amount straight up. As for legendaries then, you're after things that increase crit chance, increase damage while in a barrier. The legendary that lets you have an extra Hydra summoned is absolutely fantastic for single target. When you put it all together, this build just melts things. It synergizes so naturally and beautifully, it does loads of damage, and the resetting cooldown of your ice armor and also your Deep Freeze make you much tankier than the average Sorcerer too, so it all just works incredibly well together. Then third up today, let's talk about the Rogue. This one is sort of based on a couple of legendaries, but the actual result is sort of silly, letting you dart around the battlefield destroying every enemy on the screen instantly while being stupidly evasive and making it really hard for you to even take damage in the first place as you deal most of your damage from a distance too. First up, you want to take Puncture as your basic skill. This is just a nice basic attack with pretty consistent slows to help manage larger packs of enemies. The modifiers make it generate extra energy when hitting a crowd-controlled enemy, and also makes it so every third cast of the skill ricochets up to 2 times, automatically triggering anytime that it crits. Then you want a bunch of ranks into Penetrating Shot. This fires a piercing shot from your bow, damaging enemies in a line, then uses combo points to increase its damage even further. For the modifiers, you get a 20% increased crit chance buff on your next penetrating shot if the one before hit 3 or more enemies. Then it also deals 20% increased damage per enemy that it pierces, so the enemy at the end of the line will take much more damage than the enemy at the start. After that, grab Dash in the next cluster. This is just great mobility, and the modifiers that we have make it so anything hit by Dash takes 20% increased crit damage for 5 seconds, and if you hit a crowd-controlled enemy with your Dash, it also reduces Dash's cooldown. Then take Dark Shroud. This gives you 5 shadows around yourself that reduce damage by 8% each. As you take damage, the shadows will disappear one at a time. The modifiers give you a 10% chance not to have a shadow consumed when damaged, and also gives you 10% crit chance when you have at least 2 shadows up and running. Then for your 5th skill, you want Shadow Imbuement. This puts an effect on imbuable skills, making them apply shadow damage, most notably including Penetrating Shot. This makes enemies explode for a pop of damage when they die. The modifiers give you 25% increased crit chance against injured enemies with shadow applied, then a lovely effect where any enemy hit by the explosion on death is then vulnerable for 2 seconds afterwards. This lets you get some really nasty chain explosions that just delete waves like absolutely nothing. Then you want to grab 1 rank of Precision Imbuement for 5% increased crit chance on imbued skills, and then finally for your ultimate ability, you want to take Shadow Clone. This simply mimics your actions for 15 seconds, dealing 60% of the damage that you do. Then the modifiers make you unstoppable for 5 seconds after casting, and also increase the clone's damage by 20% up to 80% of your damage total. As for legendaries then, the big one that makes this stupidly strong makes it so anytime Penetrating Shots hits an enemy, it will shoot off 2 arrows to the side for 70% of its original damage. That will just create silly combos on large groups. Aside from that, there's stuff like making your Shadow Clone also mimic your imbuements, and then anything that restores resources or enhances critical effects is absolutely excellent for this too. Then second last for the day, let's talk about the Necromancer, and well, to put it simply, no matter how you build the Necromancer, the damage that you'll do is absolutely silly.
I am unstoppable!
Necromancer seems to be just a touch overpowered in the early game and in this beta period as well. No idea what Blizzard will do with this before the full release of the game, but that's how it is currently. The strongest build that we've seen so far though is centered around Blood Mist, and specifically this legendary right here that makes it so Blood Mist triggers Corpse Explosion on any corpses nearby. When it does so, the cooldown of Blood Mist is reduced by 1.5 seconds. This is a low roll on the legendary as well. It can go up even further than this, which essentially just lets you pop it, destroy a pack of enemies, move to the next pack, pop Blood Mist again and destroy that pack of enemies, and so that's what today's build is based around. Your basic skill here is going to be Decompose. This lets you create corpses as you channel it, which is its main use honestly, as well as generating essence to be spent. The modifiers we have give you bonus essence if an enemy dies while being affected by this skill, and one that increases the damage that you and your minions do to an enemy that has this effect channeled on them. Then when it comes to your core skills, you want none of them. I know, that sounds weird, but trust me, it'll make sense. What you do want though is the passive Hewed Flesh, which gives you a lucky hit 12% chance to create a corpse at your target's location when you hit them, doubled against bosses. Then you want to grab Blood Mist, the main fuel of the build. It makes you immune to damage while active, and it also heals you while it's active. The modifiers reduce the cooldown of this skill if you get an overpower proc, and also make it so Blood Mist leaves a corpse behind every 1 second that it's active, making it fuel itself even harder with that legendary that we mentioned earlier. Then you want to put full ranks into Corpse Explosion, as this is the big actual damage source. Corpse Explosion from the legendary does take the effects of Corpse Explosion the skill. This detonates a corpse, dealing a load of damage to enemies around it, and you take the modifier to increase its explosion radius by 15%. Then you want to take the Grim Harvest passive for 3 essence when you consume a corpse, mostly just to let you get fueled by death, which at 3 ranks makes you do 12% increased damage for 4 seconds after consuming a corpse, which is pretty much permanently active with this build. Then you ignore the next node cluster again and pick up a rank of Bone Spirit. Given that you aren't using core skills, this just lets you spend all of your essence on an actual damage source quite nicely. Then for your ultimate, you want Army of the Dead to bring out even more followers that explode after a few seconds, with the modifiers to give them a 15% chance to leave a corpse behind when they die. That's about it though. Essentially you're just creating as many corpses as possible, then exploding them with Blood Mist and just absolutely destroying everything around you, even bosses, all the while you are literally immune to damage during Blood Mist. It is just silly. As for other legendary aspects, there's another one that affects Blood Mist just to make it that little bit sillier, making Blood Mist leave a trail behind you that lasts for 4 seconds, dealing damage per second to anything standing within it, and making Blood Mist no longer reduce your movement speed. Anything past this is just gravy, just the cherry on top. If you have these 2 legendaries and these skills selected, you'll be one of the strongest things in the entire game currently. It is just silly. Then finally for our builds today, let's talk a bit about the Druid. For this one I'm going to be showing you 2 builds that are theoretically quite close to each other. I only personally have the proper legendaries for the second one, but essentially you have a build that focuses on overpower and crowd control that gets quite tanky and does pretty good damage, or you go full on companion focus, do a bit more damage and lose some of that tankiness. Personally, I think these 2 builds are pretty on par with each other. It sort of just depends what legendaries you have. Let's start then with the first build, and the basic skill that you want for both of these is actually the same because it's arguably just one of the best base skills in the game, Storm Strike. It is a melee hit with a sort of chain lightning effect on it, but the modifiers are what make it so good. First, you get a 15% chance to immobilize a target when they're hit by it, which includes the lightning chain as well. Then you also get 50% chance, 50% to make an enemy vulnerable on hit, which is a silly high proc rate for the vulnerable debuff. Then we move on to core skills, and here you want to pick up Pulverize. This skill is just okay by itself, but the modifiers are what make it incredible. The first one makes it so every 10 seconds, Pulverize is guaranteed to overpower if you are above 80% health. The second one makes it so when Pulverize does overpower, it also stuns every enemy that you hit with it. I've had Pulverize hit for over 1,000 with this easily in an AoE, and also have the stun attached to it. It is just wonderful. Then on top of that, you actually want a second core skill in Landslide. You want to max the ranks out of this, as it's just a fantastic core skill for Druid, and it'll be your main spammable damage. The modifiers on this make it apply Immobilize every time that it damages an enemy 4 times. Then the big one introduces the Terramote system. Every time that you apply various types of CC to an enemy, you get 1 Terramote in your little bar. Every time you cast Landslide, it will consume 1 of your Terramotes for each hit to make it a guaranteed crit. Then moving on to defensive abilities, you want to grab Debilitating Roar, which reduces the damage of all nearby enemies by 50% for 4 seconds. And the modifiers make it also give you 22% Fortify, and then one that has it heal you for its duration as well. Then you also want to grab Earthen Bulwark to create a barrier around you for a few seconds. The modifiers make you unstoppable while it is active, and then one that gives you 18% Fortify as well, fueling both our overpowered damage and our tankiness. Then we grab 1 rank of Ancestral Fortitude for 5% non-physical damage reduction, and then we grab the Crushing Earth passive for 15% 15% increased damage with Earth skill against crowd-controlled enemies at rank 3, and then finally our ultimate is Petrify. This turns all nearby enemies to stone for a few seconds and makes them take 25% increased crit damage in this state. The crit damage bonus and duration is doubled against bosses, and then our modifiers increase the duration of this effect, and also one that gives you spirit for free when you kill a petrified enemy. Then as far as potential legendaries to make this way stronger, you want to look out for anything that boosts core skills and earth skills. There is one that increases core skill damage relative to your fortify percentage, and one that makes pulverize count as an earth skill, one that boosts earth skills by 2 ranks if you have any fortify active, and then one that makes earth skills deal more crit damage to crowd controlled enemies, which works perfectly with landslide. Then we have our second build for the druid, which is entirely companion based.
That's called outsourcing.
This one is based pretty heavily around legendaries. It isn't too great before you have them, but once you do, it really gets the job done. The 2 main legendaries that make this one function are this one that boosts the damage of your core skills for every active companion, and then this one that not only gives you 1 additional companion, but also significantly increases the damage that your companions do. With that said, let's go over the skills that bring this all together. First, you have your basic skill, which once again is Storm Strike. It's just way too strong to ignore. Then for our core skill, we once again go hard on Landslide with the Terra Motes, upgrading it fully. This build is a bit less focused around Landslide, but it still makes great use out of it because of the other things that we have going on. After that, we grab Earthen Bulwark again with the same modifiers just to have a decent defensive ability, especially as it is a barrier, and there are various ways to use barriers with legendaries that we'll get into afterwards. Then you want to get literally every companion option available to fuel those legendary aspects. Don't worry about adding modifiers to vines, but for wolves, you want the 20% increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies, as well as the attack speed boost when you yourself get a crit. For ravens, you want to get the modifiers too, with our choices being 5% increased crit chance against any enemy hit by ravens, and then the addition of 2 more ravens that also attack on occasion to trigger this effect. Then we also grab full ranks of the Call of the Wild passive for 30% increased companion damage. Then we ignore the Wrath Cluster entirely, and we also do not pick up an actual ultimate active skill. I know it sounds weird, but trust me, it works. Instead, we pick up all 3 ranks of the Defiance passive for an extra 8% damage with Storm Strike and Landslide against elites. Simple as that. This makes this build particularly strong. It's sort of nasty and on par for the best that a druid can get as of right now. As far as further boosting yourself with legendaries, the main damage increasing ones are one that boosts Landslide, making each pillar strike twice and deal bonus damage with every hit. Then we want the legendary that boosts your damage while you have a barrier active, and then combine that with the legendary that makes Earthen Bulwark last 9 seconds instead of 6, and that just about does it really. Everything else is just slight bonuses, but all of this together is pretty damn strong. And that covers it. The best build for each of the 5 classes available in the public beta for Diablo 4. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope it's helped you out in some way. I hope you enjoy your remaining time with the beta before it's gone for good as well. Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.